So we are recording. With that, welcome to everybody who is viewing the recording. I would like to start by turning over to Dr. Cohen for some quick remarks.
Thank you, Jessica. It's my pleasure to be here today. Before I introduce our guest speaker today, I just wanted the Manorhaven community to know that the Board of Education had requested a mid-year follow-up on building protocols. And so what I did was I met with my co-chair of the building level protocol committee to review what we had in place and see where we needed to tighten up. Not loosen up, but were there any areas that we needed to tighten up in the building? So what we did was we reviewed all the protocols and came up with a building level document that was shared at a faculty meeting, and it will be shared early next week with our paraprofessional staff. Basically, if you remember the video that I sent out at the beginning of the year, many of the protocols that we put in place in September were reviewed, and I'll just remind you of a few of them quickly. As you know, that we keep our windows and doors open in the classroom. We have HEPA filters on in our learning spaces. Children wear masks at all times. Gaiters and masks with exhalation valves or vents are not permitted in the building. Always maintaining social distancing, hand washing, sanitizing upon entering and exiting the building, and before and after snacks or lunch, of course. We have our hallways set up. I know parents haven't been in the building this year, but there are arrows on the floor. We always walk to the right, so we're never closer than 6 feet with somebody coming in the opposite direction. We have markers on the floors outside the bathrooms, and our children are taught to call into the bathroom and one person at a time. And that has been going very well. Our children are trained, and they're waiting patiently until it's their turn. At recess time, we stay with our cohorts at all times. Children have mask breaks and snacks, but nobody is ever unmasked at the same time in the classroom. So what we do, in the rare occasion that there's going to be a snack time in the classroom, it's staggered so that they're never next to another child who is unmasked. What we did was we assigned times to every class every day for snack time, either in the gym where we have our tables, cafeteria tables set up, or in the cafeteria. And the 3 classes that couldn't fit this into their schedule, they might be the ones to stagger, but most often they will have snacks outside. And it's a first choice for our teachers to go outside, but if we have an inclement weather, they'll have their indoor snack time at their assigned time. We don't eat lunch in the classroom. We eat lunch at our, in our designated cafeteria spots. Something that we discussed and that was just discussed a little further was classroom coverage, paraprofessional, and teacher coverage. So if a teacher is absent, we have our permanent subs covering the class. If the permanent subs are not there, a teacher who is assigned to the cohort will be covering that class for the day to limit exposure. So that would be our ENL teachers are assigned one level. Each teacher has their own level. They may be assigned as a sub. Our reading and math teachers are also assigned levels. They might be a sub. Most often, we've been using our permanent subs who were all given face shields and masks. That's been working out really well. As far as para coverage in the classroom during recess time, we assigned paras. If it's outdoor coverage, it's fine. Who's ever available covers. But if it's indoor recess coverage, we try not to increase exposure. So we might assign a para one other class. So if their partner is absent, they'll cover. If they're absent, their partner will cover in the classroom. Basically, the rule we go by is with this, when the staff is concerned, is you don't want to be anybody else's close contact, and you don't want to let them be your close contact. So if I need a quick coverage at the end of the day at 2:15 because a teacher has professional development, or a teacher has to leave early for whatever reason, I might assign a support staff, but they're going to be out in the hallway with their head in the classroom and their head down the hallway. So they're not within 6 feet of any child at any time. And that's just for dismissal, to watch the children pack up and watch them walk down the hallway. So I guess what I want you to know is that we're taking this very, very seriously. And in the rare occasion that we do have a case in our school, I could not have survived without the efforts of Dr. Allen and Dawn Bolerman. There were evening, weekends, and early morning weekend calls and texts. The partnership was just incredible. And that's how I feel like we've been as successful as we have been, and we've been able to keep the children in school. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Dr. Allen. Thank her for being here. It's in your hands now. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me today. I know the world of COVID is constantly changing, and especially now with our vaccinations out there, things are changing and rolling quicker than I think sometimes we can even keep up with. But to Dr. Cohen's point, you know, the partnership that we have with the building principals and being able to know and have access to their protocols has been very, very helpful to Dawn and I when we have to start doing our contact tracing. You know, we know that we can count on the buildings to really have the correct protocols in place. And that does minimize exposure and opportunity for spread in schools. So it's really been very helpful. So thank you. I know that there were some questions, so I don't know if we want to move on to those kinds of, you know.
Sure. So Dr. Allen, thank you again for being here. I think everyone is really looking forward to, you know, next year and the hopes that we're beyond this. But I think as we start to think about, you know, vaccines, as you mentioned, and numbers going down, how's the district thinking about the ability to start maybe releasing a little bit of the tightness on the in-person events at the school, or whether that be things like picture days or, you know, student events, graduations, et cetera. Excuse me, you know, how can we start to think about that as we move towards the spring?
Great. Yeah, that's a great question, because like I said, everything's moving so quickly at this point, and it's great, but it does open up all these things of life getting back to as close to normal as we possibly can. So at the administrative level, we've started having conversations about exactly these things. What are we doing? And I think, you know, there's some other questions related to graduations and moving up ceremonies, and we are hoping to convene some committees in the next week or so to really have better conversations about that and what that can look like. And how we can, especially those milestone opportunities of fifth grade moving up ceremonies. How can we do that? How can we be safe about it? We are bound by, and this is where we do get a little stuck. CDC says one thing, New York State says something else. We're still bound by New York State. So even when the CDC says stuff, it doesn't automatically mean that we'll be able to do that. However, Dawn is amazing. She's our medical coordinator and also the other COVID coordinator. She has a pipeline to DOH and calls them anytime there's a change to see if New York State is implementing those same changes that are coming from the CDC. So hopefully they're telling us, hopefully soon they'll be aligning some of these things and we can really start getting back to normal with some of those bigger activities.
Thank you. I think the one thing, actually, sorry, we didn't mention before this is, if anyone has any other questions that Jess and I do not address, please feel free to type it into the chat at any time. Jess and I are monitoring it, so we can certainly ask any other questions. I apologize.
Yes, and we will also get to live questions at the end if you have them. Also, just a quick note, if you do go into the chat, please note that I did post a link to the proposed PTA bylaws, which we'll be discussing later. So if you had not had a chance to review them, they were shared in the communications about this meeting. You can see them there. But back to you, Dr. Allen. So you've actually addressed the second question on our list, which was about elementary moving up ceremonies and celebrations. So thank you for that. Yes. Another question that came in from parents is, and you're well positioned to address this. What is being done to ensure that all 504 plans and IEPs are being fulfilled as written this year? Mm-hmm. And for students whose plans have not been fulfilled or have not been able to be fulfilled due to COVID, how will that be addressed going forward into next year? And will AIS staff be fully restored?
Yeah, great question. So the AIS staff, I'll tick that one off first. That's definitely a conversation that we're having at the central office and district level at this point. You know, what is that going to look like next year? Will we have, you know, reading back in place the way it was prior to all of this, or will we be looking at a changed model? There is a committee that meets to discuss the RTI plan, which is part of that. So I'm sure they'll continue to monitor and see where we can go with that. My direction to the staff it has been in my meetings and my communications. I meet with them fairly regularly at all levels. We need to be doing the IEP and the 504 accommodations as written, especially at the elementary level. There's no reason it shouldn't be happening. We're in full time. If you have resource room, for example, you should be getting your resource room. You know, we've run into a couple of hiccups with things like OT. If they've had to be quarantined for a reason, then, you know, in some of the buildings that's created an issue. But we work with that provider and the agencies in terms of how to make up those sessions. If you have a concern about your IEP or 504, I would refer you to a few different people. One, your teacher, your service provider directly, Dr. Serpa as the building psychologist. And then of course you can always elevate it either to Dr. Cohen or to my office. Between myself, Amity Howard-Reese, or Dale Bennett, one of us can look into that. As our annual review cycle starts, it's another conversation to bring up if there's a concern about what we call compensatory services. If things weren't going the way they needed to, that's something that can absolutely be discussed at that meeting as well. But you know, I'll add that caveat again. If you're concerned, please let us know now so that we can try to figure that out. It should not be, unless there's some sort of extenuating circumstances. Okay.
Thank you.
As we start to talk about vaccines and more parents potentially become vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and now obviously we're not sure what that will look like for our students. Are there thoughts around changing some of the quarantine policies? You know, there are going to be parents who will then be, you know, it will be necessary for them to potentially travel for business and for work to sort of get back to you know, their daily lives. Have we as a district sort of started to think through what those quarantining rules will be? You know, children not needing to potentially be home for X number of days if their parents are fully vaccinated?
Yes. So, and another committee meeting that both Dr. Cohen and myself are on is the reopening committee. Dawn Boulderman's on that. Dr. Jackman, if any of you know her, she's one of our local pediatricians. She's also on the committee. So these are conversations that we discuss there. Where are we? What can we do? And then, like I said before, we get stuck a little bit in what does New York State say we can do? If you're fully vaccinated, do you have to quarantine? Do you not have to quarantine? At this point, New York State is still saying if you are fully vaccinated and exposed, you do need to quarantine. But CDC says the opposite. If you're fully vaccinated, you don't need to. So those are those follow-up phone calls that Dawn keeps making in the hopes that those will be changed shortly. And again, we discuss this at the reopening committee on a regular basis. You know, what's happening? What are the changes? What can we start doing? Where are we with everything? So hopefully New York State will align with CDC soon. And then as we have an idea of who's actually vaccinated, we'll be able to make better recommendations to the community about that.
Great.
Thank you. So, you know, we've started to, you know, I think in a lot of the questions, you've started to talk about how the district is starting to think about and plan for the school year ahead. Is there anything from your perspective that parents specifically should be thinking about as we look towards September?
So I always like to, and I hate to be worst case scenario, you know, worst case scenario, we're exactly in the same spot in September and getting ourselves ready for that. I mean, I know even for myself personally, these last few months have been torture. You know, last year, when you think back, we shut down on March 13th, a year ago, almost. The nice weather was here. We could take the kids outside. We could go for walks. We could exercise outside. Then you had the summer outdoor dining. It was great. Now we've been kind of trapped in this place of, oh gosh, it's winter. We can't go anywhere. There's not always great options for outdoor dining. What are you going to do with the kids, especially with these snow days that we've had? So again, I always try to keep myself in a place of, okay, worst case scenario, we're in this same place we were in September. From my perspective, I'm hoping we're not, and that things will be loosened up a little bit. I think it's been a positive experience overall for our elementary students being in school. full-time. I think it does give them a level of normalcy and getting to, even if they can't sit and play at recess, for example, like they used to, they can at least interact with their peers. So that's been a great thing too. So I guess my answer is, plan for the worst, but hope for the best kind of thing. Because we don't, as a district, we are having these conversations for sure, but we don't have any firm information on it yet. We don't know what the state is going to say too. They may very well say to us, that's it, everybody all back in. And then we have to figure it out. Or they may say, no, everybody stay kind of where you are. So hopefully we'll have more information on that soon though.
And I think that actually this next question sort of it's a great segue off of that. As we think about, what that normal maybe looks like, have there been any conversations or discussions around, next year vaccines are fully available, let's say to everyone, 15 and plus, or the ability for anyone who wants one to have one? Do we anticipate treating COVID similar to the flu or, strep throat in a classroom, or do we anticipate having to have this scenario where classrooms are potentially, quarantined again because of the sort of, the unknowns?
Right. So yeah, it's a great segue question. The hope and the direction that we're getting from medical staff, Dr. Jackman said it the other day, or something similar to it the other day at our reopening committee meeting, eventually this should be treated like flu and strep and everything else. We wouldn't need to be doing the, aggressive quarantining that we're doing. That's the purpose of the vaccinations. So the hope is that we are going to get there. We're just waiting for when that happens. I know I've, even for myself, listening a lot to Dr. Fauci and things coming out from the state, they talk about that herd immunity. Once you get to a point of, and I'm not going to remember the exact number, 80, 85%, then yeah, we should be talking about this is just like the flu. Something came out the other day for those of us that had the Moderna shot, though. Now they're talking about needing a booster at some point. So much is being learned so quickly, and we just don't know where it's going to take us.
I actually want to follow up to that. Do we feel as if the state will be looking at it on a sort of a local level and not by state? So not even by a county level, right? Truly by a district level. So if Port Washington, for example, is showcasing an X percentage of herd immunity versus, a Manhasset or a Roslyn or whatnot, the ability for us to make our decisions independently as a district.
So if you recall, the yellow testing, right, conversations way back in the beginning of the school year, and even recently, I know I've sent some stuff out just in case, there was a local type of conversation, and our neighbors in Great Neck, a portion, this is the interesting part also about Port Washington, it was only a portion of Great Neck that had to do that 20%. It wasn't the entire district. So there is past practice of showing local, decisions. They have recently started to ask people. Up to this point, we have not asked people if they've been vaccinated. We know it's happening, but we haven't asked. Recently, the governor's office did say, start asking. We don't know what we're going to do with that information just yet, but we are starting to ask. So it would imply that if Port Washington has a higher percentage versus somebody else, then maybe it would be different. But we just, again, we just don't know where that's going to take us. So, I would hope there would be some local conversation in that, though.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
How is the district thinking about the EVLP program for next year, and what health and safety metrics will inform that decision about whether it continues into the 2021-2022 school year?
Right. So we're definitely talking about that also. It was part of a conversation this morning I was in prior to this. It was part of a conversation that we've had with the principals. I think what we're waiting for is the state to tell us if it's a requirement, right? So that we were told this year by New York State that we had to offer the option. Initially, some districts were not considering offering that option. They had other mechanisms that we were considering if parents were not comfortable sending their students back to school, but then it did come out, you must offer it. And we went with the EVLP model. They have not said anything to us about next year yet. So we're waiting on that, but there's definitely conversations about what it looks like both ways. Do we continue? Do we not continue? And what does that look like? So it's in its infancy for us anyway.
Thank you.
You talked a little bit about the yellow zone and the testing. There has been more information of recent that's come out about it in terms of keeping, just the district updated. What is sort of the status of that? I know that was, maybe 6 months ago, then the governor potentially abandoned it, then it's back, it's not, it's sort of flip-flopping.
Right.
So where are we? Where do we stand? Are those still, as the vaccine rolls out quicker than maybe we had anticipated, are those, potentially being abandoned? And how are we sort of keeping up and making sure that we're testing across the board?
Correct. So if we are designated a yellow zone, we are prepared to go. We had early on, when this was going on, we had set up a contract with an affiliate of St. Francis Hospital, and which gets a little confusing because I know some of you may realize there is on-site testing happening, voluntary on-site testing, which is through another affiliate of St. Francis Hospital. But we have a contract in place. So if we get to the point where we are required to do this, we are ready to go. And that was part of the reason of collecting consents and things like that. That being said, since the last round, I knocked because I don't want to jinx it. Since the last round that included Great Neck, it included a portion of Massapequa and Nassau, and then a couple of Suffolk districts, there have been no new designations of yellow zones. And I think the vaccine might be playing into this. The major shift that happened at the state level was they added hospitalization rates in. So depending upon what your local or Nassau County for us, what our hospital rate was at, that would determine also yellow zone. So I'm hoping we don't have to. I really hope. I mean, I know I got lots of questions back from parents, and as a parent myself, I tend to agree. We're a school. We're not a hospital. We're not a medical facility. We're not those things. So I'm hoping we don't have to do it, but if we have to, we are prepared to do it.
Great. I think the one follow-up question there was also asked around, are we seeing, and it seems to be, and this is my personal opinion of one, but it does seem to be that community spread in the schools has really truly not been sort of where the cases are coming. Can you sort of speak to that a little bit and how it's been? I would say within the elementary schools, are we seeing that spread? How have we been able to mitigate that spread from classroom to classroom?
Yeah, great question. From mine and Dodd's assessment, because we're the ones doing the major contact tracing, the spread is minimal at best. I won't say it's zero because there are situations that sounds a little too, but we can't say for sure. But I would say it's minimal. What Dr. Cohen spoke about before in terms of the protocols in place, that has absolutely positively helped. Keeping staff that's floating around the building to a minimum, assigning people to at Weber pods, at the high school, being very specific about who's where, when. That has really been able to mitigate a lot of that spread. We also do take what I'll call an aggressive approach. If there's something in a classroom, we quarantine the class. We don't want to play around. We don't want to, take any chances. DOH has supported that from the very beginning, and said that we should be doing that. So it's not as if we're doing like they're saying, no, you absolutely shouldn't do that. They have supported that for us. And I think it's in those situations that really shows that we've prevented the spread from happening any further, if it is happening at all. And the reason I can say with confidence that it's not like, let's say we quarantine a class at Manorhaven, we follow up to see, has anybody else in that class got sick? And again, knocking on my table here, those instances are minimal at best. And I think it's all those protocols that prevents that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. We've got a lot of questions about vaccinations.
Okay.
So I'll try to bundle them all together.
Okay.
First off, is vaccination required of teachers and staff? If so, or if not, do we know what percent of our staff has been vaccinated? And has the district been able to help secure vaccinations for staff?
Okay, so we're just starting to ask the staff to find out who has been vaccinated and who hasn't been. So we don't have an exact percentage just yet. It's not required. It's not at this point, and anything we've gotten from the state ed department regarding vaccinations has been very clear that this is voluntary. I even, personally know friends of mine that, nope, I'm not doing it until I see what happens, versus me, where I was kind of like, in the beginning, to no, you know what, I'm around a lot of people and I want to not only protect me, but I have kids at home. I have, an elderly mother-in-law that lives in an apartment attached to my house. I have to do my job to prevent the spread also. So some people are comfortable, some are not, but it's not required at this point. In terms of have we been able to secure? So that was like a scramble when the vaccines first came out. And there were a couple of districts locally, you might have heard, I think Mineola was one, Garden City was another one, that through parent networks and connections with medical facilities, they were able to expedite that. I've probably called every agency under the sun. I have our names on lists. I've been told once we get the vaccines, we'll be in touch. The major reason we decided to go with the voluntary testing on site, again, through another affiliate of St. Francis, is if they have a connection and relationship with us and they get the vaccine, we will get first dibs, so to speak, for our staff. As of my last conversation with them, they had not heard anything about getting that. The interesting thing will be, for those of you probably, if you're watching the news and heard about it, Johnson & Johnson has now come on the shot. That's a one-time shot, or I should say one dose shot. The FDA, I believe, is discussing it today. So if my understanding is if that gets approved, it's going to be going to pharmacies and other smaller agencies to give out. So we do have that connection with an agency. Hopefully, if they get the shots, we will be able to get them to our teachers who want and have not been able to get it.
Great. And as a follow-up to that question, you touched on this a little before. What are the discussions about requiring the vaccine if and when it becomes available to school-age children? Is there discussion about that brewing at the state level that you've been privy to? Do you think parents should know about that?
So my guess is there are conversations happening. Just the other day, and Bonnie, maybe you remember exactly, Dr. Jackman said that the clinical trials were just starting for 12 through 15-year-olds, right? And that she anticipated in the fall that the clinical trials for younger children would start, meaning that they might have access by January for younger children, right? Okay, I'm trying to go back to the memory banks. Is that what she said? When it comes to vaccinations, that again is something that comes to the state, from the state to us, what's required. We have, and many of you probably know, you've heard from the nurses, which shot you're missing, which shot you need, the doctors tell you. There is some groundswell, I guess you could say, conversation that this will become a required vaccine. But when, I wouldn't obviously think by September, but maybe 2022 or 2023, depending upon where we are in this whole pandemic.
Right. So as we talk about the fall, and how do you think, and what can parents potentially anticipate the classrooms looking like maybe next fall, right? As things and hopeful numbers start to continue to decline, the idea of maybe desk shields or kids having the ability to, play together at recess next year. On the flip side of that, the number of flu cases and other viruses has drastically dropped across the country as well because of these measures in place, that are health and safety, benefits to everybody. What can parents potentially think about as they look about classrooms next year and what they might look like, and the ability for teachers to potentially help kids, draw with their pencils more and more? So things like that parents can think about as we look up into the fall.
Right. So I think, again, connected to the vaccination question that we just talked about, if they're talking about potential access for younger kids, not until next year, I'm going to anticipate that our elementary classrooms might look the same. The desk shields are going to stay there. The masks are going to be there. I believe Dr. Fauci is recommending masks through 2022. That's kind of what I would expect. We are learning more things, however, though, about the transmission of, the virus. So I know earlier on, for example, there was concern about contact materials. You couldn't play with the same ball at recess because who knew? CDC is kind of pulling away, I shouldn't say CDC, I'm sorry. New York State is kind of pulling away from that a little bit. They haven't been clear yet, but they are pulling away in the sense that as long as you're doing these other things, your mask on, you're washing your hands, you're keeping your distance, there is no transmission on surfaces. We have had a couple of situations where we've had to call Department of Health specifically about a shared computer, let's say, and they have said, if the people involved are assuring us that these measures are followed, they can share the computer. So I'm hoping that we'll be a little closer to sharing again in September of all the different protocols. So that'll be the big shift for us.
Great.
But the other things I think will still be in place.
Great.
Thanks. And this last question on our list of prepared questions, maybe for both Dr. Allen and Dr. Cohen. So we're coming up on our district's 1-year anniversary with COVID, which is a relationship that anybody saw coming or wanted. What lessons have you learned over the past year that you think will help create safer schools and policies for safer schools post-COVID? Is there anything good that came out of this that you would like to see continue into the future?
Right. Bonnie, I'll start. The one thing, truly, this isn't necessarily like a COVID protocol, but I do think, and especially in my world of special education, that Zoom meetings and Google Meets, whatever you want to call them, are here to stay. I have seen a dramatic increase in the participation at CSE meetings, at 504 meetings, at parent-teacher conferences. We had last night was the Schreiber orientation. Probably the most people that have ever been at an orientation in my 8 years here were able to participate. So our ability to communicate and get information out has drastically increased. And I would like to see some of that continue. And like I said, I know it's not necessarily a protocol, but I think it has been beneficial across the board. Bonnie, in terms of protocols, what are your thoughts?
Well, so what came to my mind was that when there's a will, there's a way, because for so many years, we learned that children learn best from collaborating with each other in small groups, and teachers have found a way through technology to still have small group work. So I guess what good has come of it is, even if we do have to keep our desks in rows, even if we have to keep our desk shields, we've found a way to make sure that children learn in the best way that they can.
Right. Agreed.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say what I miss is the ability for children to really get to know the children on their full grade level, and that outdoor recess, mixing outside. I know this doesn't answer the question, but that's one of the first things I'd like to see back.
Yeah.
Thank you. We've fielded a couple of questions through the chat, but I'd like to open it up now to everyone at the meeting. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in.
By a group today.
Or the Q&A was just so thorough that we haven't left anybody wanting more, which is great.
They were great questions. Having done this, and I'm not going to compare, but having done this in other situations, these were great questions.
Great.
You know, I had a chance to look them over, and I printed them out, and I wanted to make sure I really digested them. They were good questions.
We're so glad you were able to be here today. We're really grateful for your time, and more importantly, for all of the work you've been doing tirelessly for this year. We know it has been such a hard year for everybody, and that you've really been so integral to keeping our schools safe. So thank you, Dr. Allen. Thank you for being here and giving us the time this morning.
Yeah.
We will, let you go back to saving the world, or at least save Washington.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just going to say thank you. And truthfully, I mean, going back to my communication piece, the parents have been wonderful. When they do know if their child is sick, they let us know. They reach out if you have questions and concerns. I always prefer you reach out and you ask. And I don't think, and I think Bonnie would say the same thing, I don't think we could be in the spot we're in without the support of the parents also. It's really, really been helpful. So yes, thank you for having me. And, enjoy the rest of your meeting.
You too. Have a
Thank
great
you.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, I hope everybody else will stay on. We're gonna make a turn into some PTA business. The first thing I'd like to do is once again, just redirect you into the chat. If you haven't had a chance to review the bylaws, if you want to review the bylaws, you should feel free. The link will take you there. But first, we're going to turn over to Melissa Archer for a quick booster update.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I think we're really happy with how Booster's going. Pleasantly surprised. As of this morning, we're at 51% of the school is registered. And that's amazing because we still have a whole week left. And last year, I think we landed on, oh, I lost it. I had it somewhere, but we're not far off from our full registration where we were last year. So that's great. We're at 33% of children have pledged. So that's also amazing. And we're like minutes away from reaching our goal. So I think we set our goal too low. We might adjust it, but it's really great. It's really, it's just to piggyback off of what we were just saying, what you guys were just saying about the parents and the families support. It's amazing that we're really doing this and that the kids are really excited about it. So that's great. Again, the event is on Friday, March 5th at 5 p.m. and a link and registration will be sent out at some point, hopefully this weekend, but if not, certainly with plenty of time for everybody to register. And that's it. Are there any questions about it?
Feel free to unmute yourself, chime in on the chat.
Anyone? Nope.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you and Kathy Osteen, who's also on the call, for your work on fundraising, on Booster. I think it's really a testament to the parents in our community that in such a challenging year, we've already kind of outpaced our performance from last year. So it just speaks to the fact that we are a really committed and strong community, and I am personally very grateful for that. So thank you to Melissa, thanks Kathy, and let's keep it going. If you haven't registered your students or gone onto the site with them, do it over the weekend. It's super easy. They can make these cute little star student videos, which make them feel like the star of a newscast. And there's a lot of cute, fun stuff on the site. So thank you. Okay, moving into some very formal business. Our PTA Association bylaws are up for renewal this year. We shared them in the chat. We also published them a month ago and in the more recent communications about this meeting for anybody who wished to review them. Nothing has really changed. There is one substantive change, which many of you know about. It's a substantive change to the structure of our executive committee. So we have done away with the position of president-elect and moved the responsibilities of those positions into a president emeritus role. So the third year of service of the co-presidents becomes more of an advisory role with some responsibilities for oversight of certain programs. And we've also eliminated one of the 3 fundraising positions on the executive committee. It was something new that we tried a couple years ago, determined that the job could really be done effectively by 2 volunteers. So change the structure in that way as well. And that's really it for the changes to the bylaws, but it is important that we put it that we make it transparent and we put the document to a vote by the members of the association. Sarah, did you raise your hand? Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to move to introduce the proposed bylaws of the association for a vote.
Okay, do we have a second?
I second the motion.
Thank you, Vicky. Okay, so we have a motion to introduce the proposed bylaws of the association for a vote. If everybody could, you don't need to take yourself off mute or take yourself on video. If everybody could just type yay or nay into the chat, we will be able to easily tally the votes. And once we seeing a lot of yays, we have 22 participants, we have reached a quorum. Okay, the yays have it. We have voted to renew our bylaws and we will submit those to the New York State PTA in due course. Thank you all. Moving on to our next order of business. We are voting in our 2 non-executive board representatives to the annual executive board nominating committee. As many of you who have been part of the PTA before know, the executive board nominating committee is comprised of 5 members, 3 of whom come from the executive board itself, and 2 of whom are parent representatives who are not current members of the executive board. So this year, our 2 nominees for non-executive board representatives are Rachel Gaspar and Andrea Marino. They will volunteer to support that committee's work and identify candidates for open roles. Also notable, if and when we do elect them to these positions, a formal communication will go out to everyone in the school, all members of the organization, for soliciting nominations. That will have links to online nomination submission forms, as well as brief job descriptions of the open roles available. For those of you interested on this call, the open roles are junior co-president, treasurer, secretary, 2 fundraising positions, and the 2 vice president of fundraising positions, and the vice president of diversity and inclusion. So those are the open roles. I hope some of you on this call will give it some thought and self-nominate, because self-nominations are very much welcome and encouraged. But to our first order of business, which is to formally elect our non-exec board representatives. Let's see, Liz?
Yes. I move to vote on the 2 non-exec board representatives to the annual nominating committee, Rachel Gaspar and Andrea Marino. Is there a second?
Do we have a second?
I second.
Thanks, Melissa. Okay, so we're going to we'll vote on them separately. We'll vote first to elect Rachel Gaspar to the annual nominating committee. Put your yays and nays. Actually, I should say, would anybody like to discuss anything, raise anything? Any questions? Okay, yays and nays in the chat. Great. Okay, the yays have it. Rachel Gaspar is officially elected to serve on the nominating committee. And now we will vote on Andrea Marino's election to the nominating committee. Yays and nays in the chat. Okay, and we have a quorum of 22 participants still. So the yays have it. Andrea Marino has been formally elected to the nominating committee as well. I would like to thank both parent volunteers in advance for their service on this committee. It's a really important job. And we look forward to welcoming new executive board members in the next couple of months. Okay, so, I guess that kind of wraps up our meeting. Thank you all so much for joining. One thing we haven't addressed yet, I know Dr. Cohen sent out a letter to the whole community, and there will be more discussions and hopefully virtual celebrations, maybe fingers crossed, even in-person celebrations to send Dr. Cohen off into retirement. We will all miss you very much. You have been such a great asset to our school, to our community, to our children, but we'll get into this more in the next few months. I just didn't want to end the meeting without acknowledging the fact that Dr. Cohen did share the news about her retirement with our school community.
Thank you. I appreciate the acknowledgement.
It has been.
I just want to say, you will still be, I'll still be involved in everything that you're worried about. Placement of children for next year, placement of paraprofessionals next year. My official retirement date is not until September 1st. I understand that they'll be hiring the new principal to start August 1st, but I will be very involved with the opening of school. So
Yes.
I've got your backs, I promise.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what we were just going to confirm, that Dr. Cohen is going to be very much part of the transition, and that all of our processes that we're familiar with in terms of the end of the year will proceed as usual this year. So thank you, Dr. Cohen. Once again, keep the Booster-thon in mind, register, have fun. When the link goes out, please do register to participate in the Dance Fit celebration next Friday night. Our next PTA meeting will be held on Wednesday evening, March 24th. We'll be welcoming a wonderful guest, Scott Augenbaum, who is a renowned cybercrime expert and retired special agent with the FBI. So he'll be talking to us about how to keep our kids safe online, how to prevent them from becoming victims of cybercrime. And I know that's top of mind and really important to all of us, especially as our children have been spending so much more time on screens and finding things on the internet that we never knew existed. So we'll look forward to welcoming him as well. And with that,
if no one else has anything else, give everyone one last chance to unmute.
any questions for Dr. Cohen? Anything before we wrap up?
Okay, going once, going twice, closed. With that, I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, do I have a second? Would anybody like to second the motion to adjourn, or should we stay here forever? Vicky. Thank you, Vicky. Vicky, second the motion, motion to adjourn the meeting. And with that, all in favor of adjourning the meeting, raise your hands or type it into the chat. I see a bunch of videos. We are good. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all so much for joining. Really appreciate your time. See you on the 24th and see you at the Booster celebration.
Have a good weekend.